The morning was still dark when Amara woke up. The kind of dark that feels heavy, like the sky itself is tired. She lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, listening to the sound of her daughter coughing softly in the next room. That cough had become the most painful sound in her life. It used to be that she would wake up to her daughter humming or laughing at something on her phone. But that was before the hospital visits. Before the doctors started using words that were too long and too scary. Before everything changed. Amara sat up slowly, rubbed her face with both hands, and took a breath. She had learned to take a lot of those lately. Deep, slow breaths. The kind you take when you are trying to keep yourself together just long enough to get through one more day. She was 42 years old, and she had been working hard her entire life. Not the kind of hard where you complain about it at dinner parties. The kind of hard where your feet hurt by noon and your back aches by evening, and you still have to smile and keep going because there is no other choice. She had been a domestic worker for over 15 years, cleaning homes, washing dishes that were not hers, folding laundry in rooms bigger than her entire apartment. She did not mind the work. She had never been ashamed of it. Her mother had worked with her hands, and her grandmother before that. There was dignity in honest work, and Amara believed that with her whole heart. But lately, the work did not feel like enough. Lately, no matter how many hours she put in, the numbers never worked out. She would sit at her kitchen table at night, after her daughter was asleep, and go through her bills one by one, moving money around in her head like pieces of a puzzle that refused to come together. The rent was 3 months behind. The electricity bill had a red warning on it. Her daughter's medications alone cost more each month than Amara used to spend on groceries for an entire year. And somewhere in Georgia, her own mother was getting older and weaker and still waiting on the small amount Amara tried to send home every month, even when she barely had enough herself. That particular morning, the thing that made her stomach drop the moment she opened her eyes was the envelope she had left on the kitchen counter the night before. She had not been able to open it when it arrived. She knew what it was just from the way it looked. Official, stiff, the kind of envelope that never brings good news. She had placed it face down and walked away from it, telling herself she would deal with it in the morning. Well, morning had come. She got up, pulled her robe tighter around her shoulders, walked into the small kitchen, and stood over that envelope for a long moment. Then she picked it up and opened it. It was an eviction notice. 30 days. That was all they were giving her. 30 days to come up with everything she owed or find somewhere else to go. She read it twice, folded it back up, and tucked it into the front pocket of her apron. Not because she had a plan, but because she needed to go to work, and falling apart right there in her kitchen at 5 in the morning was not something she could afford to do. Her daughter needed her to hold it together. So she held it together. She made tea, not coffee, because coffee had become a small luxury she had quietly cut out. She checked on her daughter, who was still sleeping, her small face peaceful in a way that almost broke Amara completely. She kissed her forehead, whispered something soft, and then finished getting ready. The agency had assigned her to a new building that week. A big one. One of those towering glass buildings downtown that you could see from miles away. The kind that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. She had worked in expensive homes before, but this was something else. This building had a name that people said with a certain kind of respect. It was owned by one of the wealthiest men in the country. A billionaire. The kind of person who existed in headlines and on the covers of business magazines. Amara had never given much thought to people like that. They felt more like characters in a story than real human beings. She gathered her things, locked her apartment door behind her, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The city was just beginning to wake up around her. Streetlights still on. A few early buses rumbling past. A man selling coffee from a cart on the corner, steam rising into the gray sky. She walked to the bus stop and waited, her hands wrapped around the thin straps of her bag. The eviction notice sitting heavy in her apron pocket like a stone she had no idea how to put down. The ride to the building took almost 40 minutes. She sat near the window and watched the city change around her as the bus moved from her neighborhood into the part of town where the buildings got taller and the streets got cleaner and everything looked like it cost more just to look at. She thought about her daughter the whole way, about the specialist appointment coming up that she did not know how she was going to pay for, about the way her daughter had stopped complaining about being sick, which somehow felt worse than when she used to complain. Children should complain. They should be loud and restless and full of demands. The quiet acceptance in her daughter's eyes these days was the kind of thing that kept Amara up at night staring at the ceiling. She arrived at the building and stood in front of it for a moment before going in. It was even more impressive up close. All glass and steel, rising so high she had to tilt her head back to see the top. There were people in sharp suits moving through the revolving doors. A doorman in a pressed uniform. Flower arrangements in the lobby that probably cost more than her rent. She pushed down the feeling rising in her chest, adjusted the strap of her bag, and went inside. She checked in at the front desk, collected her cart and supplies from the service area, and was directed to the upper floors. The private residence floors. The ones where the billionaire actually lived. The other women on the cleaning team that morning were quiet and focused. Nobody talked much. There was an unspoken rule in places like this. You do your job, you do it well. You stay invisible. Amara understood that rule better than anyone. She had been invisible in other people's spaces for 15 years. She moved through the hallways carefully, cleaning methodically, the way she always did. Room by room. Corner by corner. She took pride in her work even on the worst days. Even today. But as the morning went on and the silence of those enormous, empty, beautiful rooms closed in around her, the weight of everything she was carrying began to press down harder. The eviction notice. Her daughter's face. The bills. The sleepless nights. The quiet fear that had taken up permanent residence somewhere behind her ribs. She kept moving. She kept cleaning. She told herself she was fine. She told herself she would figure it out. She had always figured it out before. But something about being surrounded by so much wealth while carrying so much struggle was doing something to her that she could not quite control. Every gleaming countertop, every perfectly arranged room, every piece of furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year felt like a reminder of just how thin the line was between surviving and not surviving. And Amara, for the first time in a very long time, was not sure which side of that line she was on. She pushed her cart down the hallway toward the private study at the far end of the floor. She did not know that behind that door, everything in her life was about to shift. She just knew that her hands were trembling slightly, and the envelope in her apron pocket felt heavier with every step she took. She pushed open the door to the private study slowly, the way she always did when entering a room she had never cleaned before. You never knew what you might find in a space like that. Expensive things placed carelessly on the edge of tables. Fragile objects sitting right where they could easily be knocked over. She had learned early in her career to move carefully, to look before she touched anything, to treat every room like it had its own set of unspoken rules. This room certainly felt that way. It was large and quiet, and filled with the kind of stillness that only very private spaces have. The walls were lined with bookshelves that went all the way to the ceiling, packed with books that actually looked read, not just placed there for decoration. There was a wide desk near the window, dark wood, solid, and serious looking. Papers stacked in neat piles. A lamp with a warm glow even in the daytime. Framed covers from newspapers and magazines hung along one wall, and without meaning to, Amara glanced at them as she began to work. The same face appeared in nearly all of them. Sharp eyes. A composed expression. The kind of face that had clearly made a lot of very big decisions. She looked away and started cleaning. She worked the way she always did, quietly, efficiently, moving from one end of the room to the other, wiping surfaces, straightening things that had been left slightly out of place, running her cloth along the edges of shelves without disturbing a single thing on them. It was a skill she had developed over many years. The ability to move through someone else's space without leaving any trace that she had ever been there at all. She was good at disappearing. She had spent most of her adult life being good at it. The room smelled like old books and something faintly woody, like cedar or sandalwood. It was actually a pleasant smell. Calming, almost. And for a few minutes, just a few, Amara managed to get out of her own head and simply exist in the task in front of her. That was the thing about physical work that people who had never done it did not always understand. There was a mercy in it sometimes. When your hands are busy, your mind gets a small break from itself. But the break did not last long, because as she moved toward the far side of the desk, her phone slipped. It happened fast, the way these things always do. One moment it was in her apron pocket, the next it was falling, and then there was that sharp crack against the marble floor that made her stomach drop before she even looked down. She bent quickly and picked it up. The screen had a long fracture running across it, corner to corner. She stared at it for a moment, pressing the side button to see if it still worked. The screen flickered on, and there was her wallpaper. Her daughter, sitting up in a hospital bed, wearing a pale blue gown that was too big for her small frame, holding her thumb up at the camera with this expression on her face that was trying so hard to be brave. Trying so hard to tell her mother that everything was going to be okay. Amara had taken that photo on a Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago, right after a doctor had finished explaining a treatment plan that cost more money than Amara could even say out loud without feeling dizzy. Her daughter had looked at her after the doctor left the room and said, very seriously, "Mama, don't cry. I'm going to be fine." And then she had held up her thumb and said, "Take a picture so you don't forget." Amara had laughed through her tears that day. She had taken the picture. She had made it her wallpaper so she would see it every single day and remember what she was fighting for. But standing in that silent, beautiful room, thousands of miles from any kind of comfort, staring at that small, brave face on a cracked screen, something inside Amara simply gave way. It was not a decision. It was not something she planned or allowed. It just happened. Her knees went to the floor first. Then her shoulders dropped. And then the crying came, the real kind, the deep kind. The kind that had been locked up behind months of early mornings and long bus rides and unpaid bills and sleepless nights and doctor's appointments and brave faces and held breath. It came out of her all at once, right there on the marble floor of a billionaire's private study, and she could not stop it. She was not even sure she wanted to. She cried for her daughter. She cried for the eviction notice in her pocket. She cried for her mother in Georgia, who was getting older and needed more than Amara could give. She cried for every morning she had gotten up exhausted and told herself today would be different, and then gotten into bed that night knowing nothing had changed. She cried for the version of herself who had once had plans, who had once been halfway through a nursing program before life pulled the floor out from under her. She cried for all of it, all at once, right there on the floor. She did not hear the door. That was the thing she would think about later. She did not hear a single sound. No footsteps. No handle turning. Nothing. One moment she was alone in that room, and the next moment she was not. She felt it before she saw it. That particular shift in the air that happens when another person enters a space. She looked up fast, scrambling to her feet, her face wet, her breath still unsteady, and there he was, standing in the doorway of his own study. The man from the magazine covers. Tall. Dressed simply, no suit jacket, just a dark shirt and trousers, like he had come from somewhere unexpected and hadn't bothered to be formal about it. He was looking at her with an expression she had not prepared herself for. Not irritation. Not the cold discomfort of someone who had walked in on something embarrassing and wanted it to be over quickly. Something else. Something quieter. She opened her mouth immediately. The apologies came out fast and tangled. She was sorry. She was so sorry. She would finish the room. She had not meant to. She was fine. Everything was fine. She was so sorry. She moved to grab her card, ready to disappear the way she always disappeared, ready to become invisible again because that was what she knew how to do. But he spoke, quietly, just one word first. Ma'am. She stopped. There was something in the way he said it. Not sharp. Not impatient. Just steady. Like someone who was actually present in the moment and had no intention of rushing past it. Are you all right? She almost said yes. The word was right there, ready, automatic. The word she said to everyone who asked. The word she had been saying for months without it ever being true. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the fact that she was already on the floor crying when he walked in, so the pretending felt pointless. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the cracked phone still in her hand with her daughter's face on the screen. Maybe it was just that she had been holding everything for so long that her arms had finally stopped working. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And he was looking back at her in a way that did not feel like pity and did not feel like discomfort. It felt like attention. Genuine, unhurried attention. The kind that had become so rare in her life that she almost didn't recognize it. And before she could think about it, before the part of her brain that was sensible and cautious and trained by years of hard experience could step in and talk her out of it, the words came out. Plain and honest and exhausted and real. Please help me, sir. She said it quietly, almost a whisper. I don't know what else to do. The room went completely still. He didn't move. He didn't look away. He didn't reach for his phone or shift uncomfortably or offer some quick, dismissive response that would let him off the hook and move the moment along. He just stood there, in the doorway of his own study, looking at this woman he had never spoken a word to before, and he stayed. He simply stayed. And in that moment, that small, impossible moment, something in the air between them changed in a way that neither of them could have predicted when the morning began. He moved first. Not toward the door, not to create distance or make the moment easier to escape from, but toward the chair nearest to her. He pulled it slightly away from the desk and sat down in it. Not behind the desk, the way powerful people often do when they want to remind you of the space between you, but right there, on the same side, close enough that she did not have to raise her voice. Then he gestured, gently, to the chair across from him. Not an order, not even really a request. Just an open hand, a small movement that said, sit down if you want to. You do not have to stand for this. Amara looked at the chair for a moment. Everything inside her that had been trained by years of working in other people's spaces told her this was wrong. You did not sit in the furniture. You did not make yourself comfortable in rooms that did not belong to you. You stayed on your feet. You stayed professional. You stayed in your lane. But her knees were still weak from crying, and her heart was still pounding, and the eviction notice was still in her pocket, and her daughter's face was still cracked across her phone screen. So she sat. She perched on the edge of the chair, the way people do when they are not sure they are allowed to be somewhere. Her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes cast slightly down. There was a silence between them for a moment. Not an uncomfortable one. More like the kind of silence that happens when someone is actually thinking before they speak, which was rarer than people realized. Then he leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, and he said, in a voice that was even and unhurried, "Tell me what's going on." That was it. No grand speech. No formal introduction. No reminder of who he was or what floor they were on or how unusual this situation was. Just 4 words. Simple and direct, and somehow the most open door anyone had offered her in a very long time. And Amara, who had not planned any of this, who had come to work that morning with nothing but the intention of getting through the day, started talking. She started with her daughter because her daughter was always where everything started and ended for her. She told him about the diagnosis, about the specialist appointments and the long waiting rooms and the tests and the results, and the moment a doctor had sat across from her and explained a condition with a complicated name that basically meant her daughter's own body was working against her. She told him about the medications, about how the first prescription alone had cost so much that she had stood at the pharmacy counter and done the math in her head 3 times, hoping she was wrong, knowing she was not. She told him about the medical bills that had been arriving ever since, each one with a total that made the previous one seem manageable by comparison. She told him about her second job, the one she had taken on weekends cleaning an office building across town, getting there by 6 in the morning and leaving by noon, and then going straight to whatever else needed doing. She told him about her mother in Georgia, getting older, needing more, still waiting for the money Amara sent home every month, money that had gotten smaller and smaller without her mother knowing why. And then she told him about the envelope. She pulled it from her apron pocket and held it in her hands while she talked about it, not handing it to him, just holding it the way you hold something that has weight to it. 30 days. That was what they had given her. She said it plainly, without drama, because it was simply the truth, and the truth did not need to be performed. She watched his face while she talked. She was used to reading rooms, used to watching people's expressions shift when they decided they had heard enough or when they were waiting politely for a pause so they could offer something quick and move on. His face did not do that. His eyes stayed on her. He did not check his watch. He did not glance toward the door. He did not offer those small, impatient sounds people make when they are technically listening but not really present. He was present. Fully, quietly, completely present. He asked questions. Not intrusive ones. Careful ones. How long had her daughter been sick? What had the doctors said about the treatment timeline? Was she still in school? Was there any family nearby who could help? He asked about the eviction, about whether she had spoken to anyone at the agency, about what her options looked like from where she was standing. He asked in the way that someone asks when they are genuinely trying to understand a situation, not when they are preparing a response or looking for the fastest way to feel like they have done something. Amara answered everything. She was surprised by how much she said. She was not usually someone who talked about herself. She had spent so many years being the person in the background, the person who asked how others were doing and then listened, that sitting in a chair and being the one answering questions felt almost strange. But she kept going because he kept asking, and because something about the steadiness of him made the telling feel safe. At some point, she mentioned the nursing program. She was not sure why. It came out almost as an aside, a small detail attached to something else she was saying, but he caught it. He asked her to say more about it. So she did. She told him that she had enrolled years ago, when her daughter was still very small, when she had still believed that if she worked hard enough and planned carefully enough, she could change the direction of things. She had gotten through 2 years of the program. She had been good at it. Her instructors had told her she had the right instincts for patient care, the kind that could not really be taught. But then life had shifted the way life sometimes does without asking your permission. And she had needed to work more hours to cover more expenses. And the classes had fallen away one by one until she had stopped going entirely. She had not let herself think about it much since then. Thinking about it hurt in a particular way that was not useful, so she had put it away. Saying it out loud now in this room, to this man she did not know, she felt the edges of that old hurt again. The version of herself she had not become. He was quiet for a moment after she finished. Not the quiet of someone who did not know what to say. The quiet of someone who was actually absorbing what they had just heard. Then he stood. He said, simply, "Give me a moment." He walked to the other side of the room, his back to her, and made 2 phone calls. She could not hear much of what he said. His voice was low, and he spoke quickly, the way people speak when they know exactly what they need and who to call to get it. She sat in that chair and looked at her hands and tried to understand what was happening. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. Nothing in 15 years of moving through other people's spaces invisibly had given her a framework for sitting in a billionaire's private study, having just told him everything while he made phone calls on her behalf. She did not know whether to feel grateful or terrified or both at the same time. When he came back, he sat down again. He looked at her calmly and said, "I'd like to help, if you'll let me." 6 words. And yet the way he said them was not like charity. It was not the tone of someone doing a good deed that they would feel satisfied about later. It was the tone of someone who had made a decision and meant it. Amara looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to say no. The part of her that had survived this long on her own, the part that had learned the hard way that depending on people usually led to disappointment, rose up fast and tried to get her to say no. But then she thought about her daughter, about that brave little thumb held up in a hospital gown, about 30 days. And she said yes.